My name is Sage, I am 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago I discovered my entire family had been lying to me for years while planning the most elaborate betrayal imaginable. What started as a simple birthday party invitation turned into uncovering a web of financial deception, stolen inheritance, and family secrets that would shatter everything I believed about blood loyalty. The text from my mother saying they could not afford my daughter's birthday party while I knew they were secretly planning their luxury Aspen vacation was just the beginning of a revenge story that would leave my entire family in ruins. Before we dive into how I systematically destroyed the people who raised me, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? If you are ready to hear about the most satisfying family takedown you have ever witnessed, smash that like button and subscribe because this story about blood, betrayal, and beautiful revenge is about to get wild. Trust me, you will want to stick around for every single twist. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday. I was preparing breakfast for my 5-year-old daughter Luna when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The message was short and apologetic, explaining that they would not be able to attend Luna's 6th birthday party next weekend because money was tight and they simply could not afford the drive from their home 2 hours away. My heart sank reading those words, not because I was surprised by their absence, but because this had become a pattern over the past year. My parents, Robert and Diana, along with my younger brother Marcus, had been increasingly distant since my father's retirement. They claimed financial hardship was forcing them to cut back on family gatherings, gifts, and even phone calls. As a single mother working as a graphic designer, I understood money troubles intimately. I had been supporting myself and Luna completely alone since her father disappeared when I was pregnant, never receiving a single dollar in child support or family assistance. What made this particular message sting was the timing. Luna had been talking about her birthday party for months, specifically about how excited she was that Grandma and Grandpa would finally meet her new friends from school. I had planned everything around their schedule, even changing the date twice to accommodate my mother's supposed work commitments at the local library where she claimed to have taken a part-time job to make ends meet. That afternoon, while Luna was at school, I decided to do something I had never done before. I drove to my parents' neighborhood, not to confront them, but simply to drop off some of Luna's old clothes that my mother had mentioned needing for a charity drive. Their house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, the same house where I had grown up, where family dinners once brought us together every Sunday. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Sitting in their garage, clearly visible through the open door, were multiple pieces of expensive luggage, ski equipment, and winter gear that definitely had not been there during my last visit 3 months ago. My hands trembled as I approached their front door, my mind racing with questions I was afraid to ask. My mother answered the door with surprise and what I now recognize as panic in her eyes. Behind her, I could see travel brochures scattered across their dining room table, and my brother Marcus quickly shoving papers into a folder when he noticed me standing in the doorway. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diana quickly ushered me inside while explaining away the obvious signs of an upcoming trip. They had won a contest, she said, looking everywhere except directly at my face. A radio station giveaway for a ski weekend that they simply could not pass up, especially since it was completely free. The story felt rehearsed and hollow, delivered with the kind of nervous energy that comes from telling a lie you have not quite perfected yet. Marcus, who had always been terrible at deception, excused himself to the bathroom and left his phone face up on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a text message notification, and I caught a glimpse of words that would change everything. Aspen reservation confirmed, presidential suite, March 22nd through 29th. My blood turned to ice. March 22nd was exactly 4 days after Luna's birthday party, the party they claimed they could not afford to attend because money was too tight for even a tank of gas. The presidential suite at any Aspen resort would cost more than I made in 3 months, possibly more than I made in 6 months, depending on the location. I maintained my composure during the remaining 20 minutes of small talk, accepting their explanations and even pretending to be happy about their good fortune. Inside, however, my mind was working overtime, processing this information and trying to understand how my retired parents, who claimed to be struggling financially, could afford a week-long luxury vacation in one of the most expensive ski destinations in America. The drive home passed in a blur of anger, confusion, and growing suspicion. I began replaying conversations from the past year, looking for clues I might have missed. Their claims about money problems had started around the time of my grandfather's death 14 months ago. My paternal grandfather, whom I had always been close to, had passed away after a brief illness, leaving behind what I assumed was a modest estate. I remembered my father handling all the estate matters, telling me that after debts and expenses, there was very little left to inherit. He had seemed genuinely sad about this, explaining that Grandpa's medical bills and the costs of maintaining his property had eaten up most of his savings. At the time, I was dealing with Luna's transition to kindergarten and a particularly demanding work project, so I had not questioned the details. That evening, after putting Luna to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and my laptop, determined to find answers. I started with simple internet searches about my grandfather's property, which had been sold shortly after his death. Public records showed the house had sold for significantly more than my father had led me to believe, nearly $300,000 more than the figure he had given me. My hands shook as I scrolled through more records, discovering that my grandfather had also owned a rental property I had never known about, plus several investment accounts that appeared substantial based on the limited information available through public searches. The picture emerging was of a man who had accumulated considerable wealth over his lifetime, not the financially struggling retiree my father had described. As I dug deeper into available records, I found references to a will that had been filed with the county probate court. According to the basic information available online, the will had named multiple beneficiaries, but I could not access the specific details without requesting official copies. However, the fact that there were multiple beneficiaries mentioned made my father's claims about everything being consumed by debt seem increasingly unlikely. By 3 a.m, I had compiled a list of questions and inconsistencies that painted a disturbing picture. My family had not just lied about their financial situation, they had apparently inherited a significant amount of money from my grandfather and deliberately hidden this fact from me. The Aspen trip was not some lucky contest win, it was a luxury vacation funded by money that should have been shared among all the grandchildren, including me. The betrayal cut deeper than I had ever imagined possible. These were the people who had raised me, who had taught me about honesty and family loyalty. They had watched me struggle as a single mother, never offering help, while secretly enjoying the benefits of an inheritance they had stolen from under my nose. The next morning brought a clarity so sharp it felt like stepping out of fog into brilliant sunlight. I woke up with red eyes from crying and a mind that had transformed overnight from confused victim to strategic planner. The emotional devastation of discovering my family's betrayal had crystallized into something much more dangerous: cold, calculated determination. I dropped Luna off at school with extra hugs and promises about making her birthday party absolutely perfect, knowing that this might be the last normal conversation we would have for a while. She chattered excitedly about her upcoming celebration, completely unaware that her innocent birthday party was about to become the opening move in a chess game her mother was preparing to dominate. My first stop was the county courthouse, where I requested official copies of my grandfather's will and estate documents. The clerk, a kindly woman named Mrs. Patterson, explained that as a potential beneficiary, I had the right to access these records. The filing fee was $30 I could barely afford, but I handed over the cash knowing it was the best investment I would ever make. While waiting for the documents to be processed, I sat in my car and made a list of everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. My grandfather had owned his house, at least one rental property, and multiple investment accounts. The house alone had sold for significantly more than my father claimed the entire estate was worth. My father had been the executor, which meant he had controlled all decisions about how assets were distributed. The courthouse called 2 hours later. I picked up a manila envelope that felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, knowing it contained either confirmation of my worst fears or proof that I had made a terrible mistake about my family. I drove to a nearby coffee shop and found a quiet corner booth where I could review the documents without interruption. The truth was worse than I had imagined. According to the will, my grandfather had left his entire estate to be divided equally among his 4 grandchildren, myself, Marcus, and 2 cousins from my father's sister who lived across the country. The total value of the estate, after all legitimate debts and expenses, was listed as just over $800,000. My share should have been approximately $200,000. But there was more. Attached to the will was a personal letter my grandfather had written specifically to me, sealed and marked to be delivered upon his death. My father, as executor, would have been responsible for ensuring I received this letter. The envelope had never been opened. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of my grandfather's careful handwriting. He wrote about how proud he was of my strength as a single mother, how he had watched me struggle and wanted to make sure Luna and I would have security. He specifically mentioned setting aside additional funds in a separate account intended specifically for Luna's education, funds that were meant to supplement my portion of the inheritance. The letter also contained information about a safety deposit box, along with the location and access instructions. My grandfather had given me joint access to this box years ago during a visit when I was in college, though I had completely forgotten about it. Inside, he wrote, I would find important documents and additional information about accounts my father might not know about. I sat in that coffee shop booth for over an hour, reading and rereading the letter, trying to process the magnitude of what my family had stolen from me. It was not just money. It was my grandfather's final gift, his attempt to secure my daughter's future, his way of showing love that my father had deliberately hidden from me. The safety deposit box was located at a bank 15 minutes away. I called to confirm my access and was told I could visit any time during business hours. The representative mentioned that the box had not been accessed since shortly after my grandfather's death, which meant my father might have visited it once, but had not cleaned it out. At the bank, my hands shook as I signed the access log and followed a stern-faced employee into the vault. The safety deposit box was larger than I had expected, and when opened, it revealed a treasure trove of information my father had hoped I would never find. There were copies of all the estate documents, detailed financial statements showing the true value of my grandfather's assets, and a folder labeled For Sage, Educational Fund. Inside that folder was documentation for an account containing $50,000 specifically designated for Luna's future education expenses. The account had been set up years ago, with me listed as the beneficiary, but it had never been mentioned during the estate settlement. There were also handwritten notes from my grandfather expressing his concerns about my father's gambling habits and his decision to keep certain assets separate to protect them from Robert's poor financial decisions. I spent 2 hours photographing every document, creating a detailed digital record of evidence that proved my family had stolen over $250,000 from me and my daughter. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, documented in my grandfather's own handwriting and in official financial records that my father could not dispute. But I did not drive straight to a lawyer's office or call to confront my father immediately. Instead, I went home and began planning something much more satisfying than a simple legal battle. My family had taught me that blood meant nothing when money was involved. They had shown me that loyalty was a one-way street and that love could be conditional on financial gain. If they wanted to play games with money and deception, I would show them how those games were really won. That evening, I created multiple copies of all the evidence and stored them in different locations. I opened new email accounts and cloud storage services, uploading everything to ensure it could never be lost or destroyed. I researched estate lawyers, private investigators, and financial fraud specialists, building a network of professionals I could call upon when the time was right. Most importantly, I began documenting every interaction with my family from this point forward. I purchased a small recording device and began keeping detailed written records of every phone call, text message, and conversation. If they wanted to continue lying to my face while spending my inheritance, I would give them plenty of rope to hang themselves with. The woman who had walked into that courthouse that morning had been a confused and heartbroken daughter. The woman who went asleep that night was a strategic predator who had just identified her prey and begun planning their destruction. My family had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. They thought I was the same naive girl who would accept their explanations and never question their authority. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Over the next week, I transformed into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the trusting daughter who had always given her family the benefit of the doubt. In her place emerged a methodical investigator who documented every lie and planned every move with surgical precision. I maintained normal contact with my parents, even chatting about Luna's party plans, all while gathering evidence that would eventually destroy them. My first strategic move was reaching out to my cousins, Rebecca and Michael, who lived in Oregon and had also been named as beneficiaries in our grandfather's will. I had not spoken to them in over 2 years, but I crafted careful messages asking about their memories of Grandpa and whether they had received anything special from his estate. Their responses confirmed my worst suspicions. Rebecca called me within hours of receiving my message, her voice tight with confusion and hurt. She explained that Uncle Robert had contacted them shortly after the funeral, informing them that after all debts and expenses were paid, there was virtually nothing left to distribute. He had sent each of them a check for $500, claiming it was all that remained of their grandfather's legacy. Michael's story was identical. Both cousins had been disappointed but not surprised, since they lived far away and had not been involved in the estate settlement process. They trusted their Uncle Robert completely and had no reason to question his handling of their grandfather's affairs. When I carefully shared some of the information I had discovered, the silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice shaking with anger. She told me about the financial struggles she and her husband had been facing, how they had been hoping their grandfather's inheritance might help them avoid losing their house. The $500 had been a cruel joke compared to what they had been expecting, but they had accepted Robert's explanation about debts and expenses consuming everything. I spent hours on the phone with both cousins, sharing photographs of the documents I had found and explaining the true scope of what had been stolen from all of us. Together, we calculated that Robert had personally kept over $600,000 that should have been distributed among his children and nieces and nephews. The theft was not just financial, it was a betrayal of everything our grandfather had wanted for his family. Both cousins agreed to join me in whatever action I decided to take, but they lived too far away to be immediately helpful with gathering additional evidence. However, Rebecca had something valuable to contribute. She had saved every text message and email from Uncle Robert during the estate settlement, including several where he had made specific claims about debts and expenses that we now knew were lies. My next move was more delicate, but potentially more rewarding. I reached out to my grandfather's former neighbors, particularly Mrs. Chin, who lived next door and had been close friends with him for over 20 years. I visited her under the pretense of sharing memories and asking about keepsakes, but my real goal was gathering intelligence about my grandfather's true financial situation. Mrs. Chin welcomed me warmly and was eager to share stories about my grandfather. Over tea and homemade cookies, she painted a picture of a man who had been far more financially successful than my father had ever acknowledged. She mentioned expensive home improvements my grandfather had paid for in cash, luxury trips he had taken in his final years, and his frequent comments about wanting to leave something substantial for his grandchildren. Most importantly, she remembered conversations where my grandfather had expressed concerns about my father's financial responsibility. He had apparently been worried about Robert's gambling habits and had mentioned taking steps to protect certain assets from being mismanaged. Mrs. Chen also revealed that she had seen my father visiting the house multiple times after the funeral, loading boxes and furniture into a rental truck that he had never mentioned to the rest of the family. Armed with this new information, I began phase 2 of my investigation. I hired a private investigator named David Martinez who specialized in financial fraud cases. For $800 I could barely afford, David agreed to conduct a thorough background check on my father's recent financial activities and help me build a comprehensive case. David's initial findings were devastating. In the 6 months following my grandfather's death, my father had made several large purchases, including a new truck, a boat, and extensive renovations to their home. Bank records showed deposits that aligned perfectly with the timeline of estate asset liquidation, and credit reports indicated that my parents had paid off substantial debts around the same time. Most damning was evidence that my father had transferred large sums of money into investment accounts under both his and my mother's names, accounts that had not existed before our grandfather's death. The paper trail was clear and undeniable. My father had systematically stolen the inheritance and used it to finance a lifestyle upgrade while lying to his children about financial hardship. But David uncovered something even more infuriating. My parents had not just stolen money from the estate, they had also claimed my grandfather's death benefits from his Veterans Administration account and his pension fund, benefits that should have been distributed according to his will rather than automatically going to his executor. The total amount of theft was approaching $300,000 when all sources were included. While David continued his investigation, I began implementing the psychological component of my revenge plan. I started making casual comments to my mother about my own financial struggles, emphasizing how difficult it was to provide for Luna without any family support. I mentioned specific expenses like Luna's upcoming dental work and my car repairs, watching my mother's face for any signs of guilt or hesitation. The responses were exactly what I expected. My mother would express sympathy and make vague promises about helping when things improved for them financially, all while planning their luxury Aspen vacation. She even had the audacity to suggest that I should consider asking Luna's absent father for support, knowing full well that he had abandoned us completely. My brother Marcus proved to be the weakest link in their deception. During a casual coffee meeting, I steered the conversation toward our grandfather and watched Marcus become increasingly uncomfortable. He let slip several details about improvements to their parents' house and mentioned seeing expensive items that did not align with their claims about money being tight. When I pressed him gently about the inheritance, Marcus's story had subtle inconsistencies that revealed he knew more than he was admitting. He mentioned legal fees and estate taxes that seemed excessive given what I now knew about the estate's actual value. Most tellingly, he seemed surprised when I mentioned not receiving any personal items from our grandfather, suggesting that he had expected me to receive something substantial. I began recording all conversations with family members, using a small device hidden in my purse that captured crystal-clear audio of every lie they told me. I documented their continued claims about financial hardship while simultaneously gathering evidence of their actual spending patterns and lifestyle improvements. The most satisfying part of this phase was watching them dig their hole deeper every day. Each conversation contained new lies that contradicted previous statements. Each excuse for their absence from family events revealed more about their true priorities, and each expression of fake sympathy for my financial struggles added to the mountain of evidence that would eventually bury them. By the end of the second week, I had assembled a comprehensive case that included financial records, witness statements, recorded conversations, and a timeline that clearly showed how my family had systematically defrauded me and my cousins. The evidence was so overwhelming that multiple lawyers I consulted told me it was one of the clearest cases of estate fraud they had ever seen. But I was not ready to spring my trap yet. I wanted them to enjoy their Aspen vacation, to spend my grandfather's money on their luxury getaway while believing they had successfully deceived me. I wanted them to feel secure in their theft and confident in their lies, because the fall from that height would be so much more satisfying than catching them before they had fully revealed the depths of their greed and deception. Are you starting to see where this is going? Because what happens next is the kind of justice that makes your heart race and your faith in karma restored. Stay with me, because the takedown I orchestrated was so perfectly timed and devastatingly complete that my family never saw it coming. The morning of March 22nd arrived with crystal clear skies, the kind of perfect weather that made luxury vacations even more enjoyable. While my parents were boarding their flight to Aspen for their week-long presidential suite getaway funded by stolen inheritance money, I was sitting in the office of Catherine Mills, one of the most ruthless estate attorneys in the state. Catherine had reviewed my evidence over the previous weekend and confirmed what I already knew: my case was airtight. The documentation I had gathered painted a clear picture of deliberate fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. More importantly, she assured me that the timing of my legal action, coinciding with their expensive vacation, would make their theft impossible to deny or minimize. My first move was filing a formal complaint with the probate court, requesting an emergency audit of the estate and immediate freezing of all assets that could be traced to my grandfather's inheritance. Catherine had strategically timed this filing for the afternoon of their first day in Aspen, ensuring they would be too far away and too relaxed to mount an immediate defense. Simultaneously, I filed complaints with the State Bar Association regarding my father's conduct as executor, the District Attorney's Office regarding potential criminal fraud, and the Internal Revenue Service regarding unreported inheritance income. Each complaint was backed by the comprehensive evidence package I had assembled, making it impossible for any agency to dismiss my claims as family drama or misunderstanding. But my masterstroke was personal, not legal. That evening, while my parents were enjoying their first night in their stolen luxury suite, I created a group text message that included my mother, father, brother, and both of my cousins in Oregon. The message I sent was simple and devastating. Hope you are enjoying Aspen. I found Grandpa's will and safety deposit box. See you in court. Attached to that message were photographs of the most damning evidence: the real will showing the four-way split, documentation of the education fund for Luna, and bank records showing exactly where our grandfather's money had gone. I also included screenshots of their social media posts from Aspen, showing them toasting with champagne and posing in front of ski slopes, with timestamps proving they were spending stolen money while claiming poverty. The response was immediate and panicked. My phone exploded with calls that I declined to answer and text messages that grew increasingly desperate as the evening wore on. My mother demanded explanations, my father threatened legal action, and Marcus begged me to call him so they could discuss this misunderstanding privately. I responded to none of their communications. Instead, I forwarded every message to Catherine, building an even stronger case by documenting their attempts at damage control and intimidation. Their panic was confirmation that they knew exactly what they had done and understood that their carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed. The next morning brought the news I had been waiting for. Catherine called to inform me that the court had granted our emergency motion, freezing all assets connected to the inheritance and appointing an independent administrator to review the estate settlement. More importantly, the court had issued a summons requiring my father to appear for questioning about his handling of executor duties, with potential criminal charges pending based on the evidence we had provided. My private investigator David had also delivered his final report, which included bank surveillance footage of my father making large cash deposits during the estate liquidation period, credit card records showing luxury purchases immediately after those deposits, and phone records proving he had contacted financial institutions to move money before officially notifying beneficiaries about the estate settlement. But the most satisfying evidence came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chin, my grandfather's former neighbor, had remembered something crucial after our conversation. She had kept a spare key to my grandfather's house and had occasionally checked on the property after his death. She had photographs on her phone of my father loading expensive furniture and artwork into a rental truck, items that had never been mentioned in the estate inventory. Those photographs were devastating because they showed my father stealing physical property that should have been distributed among all beneficiaries, not just taking money. Some of the furniture visible in Mrs. Chen's photos was worth thousands of dollars and had significant sentimental value to the entire family. The theft was not just financial, it was emotional and deeply personal. By Wednesday of their Aspen week, the walls were closing in completely. The court had scheduled an emergency hearing for the following Monday, requiring my parents to return immediately and provide detailed accounting of all estate assets. The Bar Association had launched an ethics investigation that could result in my father losing his professional licenses. The IRS had begun an audit of their tax returns, looking for unreported inheritance income. Most importantly, the district attorney's office had informed Catherine that they were considering criminal fraud charges, which could result in felony convictions and prison time. The evidence we had provided met every requirement for proving deliberate intent to defraud, and the amounts involved elevated the charges to serious felony levels. My parents cut their vacation short, returning home Thursday morning to deal with what my mother's frantic voicemail described as a family emergency. They had gone from posting photos of champagne toasts to frantically calling lawyers, from enjoying stolen luxury to facing potential imprisonment, all in the span of less than a week. The final blow came Friday afternoon when Catherine received confirmation that the independent estate administrator had uncovered additional irregularities in my father's handling of executor duties. There were unauthorized loans he had made to himself from estate funds, personal expenses he had charged to the estate account, and property sales where he had kept proceeds that should have been distributed to beneficiaries. The total amount of theft had grown to over $400,000 when all irregularities were included. This was not a simple misunderstanding or poor record-keeping. It was systematic, deliberate fraud carried out over more than a year by someone who had abused his position of trust to steal from his own children and nieces and nephews. That weekend, as my parents sat in their house surrounded by furniture and artwork they had stolen from my grandfather's estate, trying to figure out how to avoid prison and financial ruin, I was planning Luna's birthday party. The same birthday party they had claimed they could not afford to attend because money was too tight, while secretly preparing for their luxury Aspen getaway funded by money they had stolen from their granddaughter's educational fund. The irony was perfect, and the timing was poetic. Luna's party would be a celebration not just of her 6th birthday, but of justice finally being served and truth finally being revealed. My family had taught me that blood meant nothing when money was involved, but I had learned the lesson better than they ever expected. They had created a monster, and now that monster was coming for everything they had stolen, everything they had built on lies, and everything they thought they had gotten away with. The student had become the master, and class was officially in session. Monday morning's emergency court hearing was a masterpiece of legal devastation that exceeded even my wildest expectations. Catherine had prepared a presentation that methodically destroyed every lie my family had told, using their own words, actions, and financial records to build an unshakable case of deliberate fraud and theft. My parents arrived at the courthouse looking like they had aged a decade in the past week. My father, usually impeccably dressed and confident, appeared disheveled and nervous. My mother could barely make eye contact with anyone, clutching a tissue and dabbing at tears that seemed more about self-pity than genuine remorse. Marcus sat behind them, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with a reputation for having zero tolerance for estate fraud, reviewed our evidence with the kind of focused attention that made my father squirm visibly in his seat. When she began questioning him about specific financial transactions, his carefully rehearsed explanations crumbled under the weight of documented proof. The moment that will forever be burned into my memory was when Judge Harrison asked my father to explain the $50,000 educational fund that had been established specifically for Luna. He stammered something about not knowing such an account existed, despite bank records showing he had accessed it multiple times and eventually transferred the entire amount into his personal investment portfolio. Catherine then presented this safety deposit box letter, reading my grandfather's words aloud in the hushed courtroom. As she read about his love for Luna and his specific intentions to secure her educational future, I watched my mother break down completely. These were not crocodile tears. This was the moment she finally understood the full scope of what they had stolen and the devastating impact on their granddaughter's future. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. She ordered immediate restitution of all stolen funds plus interest and penalties, appointed an independent administrator to oversee the complete redistribution of estate assets, and referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Most satisfying of all, she ordered my parents to immediately return all physical property they had taken from my grandfather's house, including furniture, artwork, and personal items. But the legal victory was just the beginning of their complete social and financial collapse. Word of the court proceedings had somehow reached their social circle, and by Tuesday afternoon, my mother's phone was ringing constantly with calls from shocked friends and neighbors who had heard about the estate fraud charges. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a detailed article about the inheritance theft that included my father's name, the amounts involved, and the potential criminal charges he was facing. The headline read, "Local businessman accused of stealing inheritance from own children and grandchildren," and it appeared both online and in the print edition that was delivered to every house in their neighborhood. My father's business partnerships began dissolving immediately. His law practice, which had been struggling already, lost 3 major clients within 48 hours of the news breaking. Professional colleagues who had respected him for decades started distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone facing fraud charges and potential disbarment proceedings. The social isolation was particularly brutal for my mother, who had built her entire identity around her reputation as a devoted grandmother and pillar of the community. Friends stopped calling, neighbors avoided eye contact, and her volunteer position at the local library was quietly terminated after other volunteers complained about working alongside someone accused of stealing from her own grandchild. Marcus faced his own consequences as word spread through his workplace and social circles. Although he had not been directly involved in the theft, everyone assumed he had known about it and benefited from the stolen money. His girlfriend of 2 years broke up with him, unable to deal with the family scandal and the constant whispers everywhere they went. The financial restitution order created immediate cash flow problems for my parents that forced them to confront the reality of their situation. They had spent most of the stolen money on luxury purchases, home improvements, and expensive vacations that could not be easily converted back to cash. The court ordered them to sell assets to raise the restitution funds, but their house was now underwater due to excessive borrowing against its equity. Their boat, purchased with stolen inheritance money, was repossessed when they could not make payments after their accounts were frozen. The expensive truck had to be sold at a loss to raise cash for legal fees. The home improvements they had made with my grandfather's money actually decreased their property value because they had been poorly planned and executed without proper permits. Most devastating was the discovery that my father had been gambling with estate funds during the settlement period, losing over $60,000 at local casinos while telling his children that debts and expenses had consumed their inheritance. The casino records, which Catherine subpoenaed as part of our case, showed a pattern of increasing desperation as he tried to win back money he had already spent on personal expenses. My cousins in Oregon had hired their own attorney and filed additional claims for damages beyond the basic inheritance amount. They were seeking compensation for the financial hardship they had endured as a result of my father's lies, including nearly losing their house because they had counted on inheritance money that had been stolen from them. The Bar Association's ethics investigation moved quickly once they received the court documents and evidence package. My father received notice that his license to practice law was being suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, effectively ending his legal career and eliminating his primary source of income. But perhaps the most poetic justice was watching my parents face the same financial struggles they had forced me to endure as a single mother. They were suddenly dealing with legal bills they could not afford, mounting debt from their lifestyle choices, and the prospect of losing their home due to poor financial decisions. The stress was taking a visible toll on both of them. My father developed a drinking problem that everyone in their social circle noticed, while my mother suffered what appeared to be a nervous breakdown that required medical intervention. They had gone from being respected community members to local pariahs in less than 2 weeks. Their Aspen vacation, which had triggered my investigation and revenge plan, became a symbol of their greed and betrayal that followed them everywhere. People in their community referred to it as the trip that cost them everything, and local social media groups shared screenshots of their vacation photos alongside news articles about the inheritance theft. The irony was absolutely perfect. They had stolen my grandfather's money to fund a luxurious lifestyle and expensive vacations, but their greed had ultimately cost them their reputation, their financial security, their social connections, and potentially their freedom. The same money they had used to buy temporary happiness had become the evidence that destroyed their lives completely. As I watched their world crumble around them, I felt something I had never experienced before. The pure satisfaction of seeing karma work its magic with perfect timing and devastating precision. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of my new home, watching Luna play on the swing set that my grandfather had unknowingly provided through his stolen inheritance, finally returned with interest and penalties. The house itself was modest, but perfect for us, purchased with funds that should have been mine all along, in a neighborhood where no one knew about family drama or betrayals. The legal proceedings had concluded with outcomes that exceeded even Catherine's optimistic predictions. My father had pled guilty to multiple felony fraud charges to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, receiving 3 years probation, community service, and permanent loss of his law license. My mother, while not criminally charged, had been required to return every item of jewelry, furniture, and artwork they had acquired with stolen money. The financial restitution had been complete and then some. Beyond returning the original inheritance amounts plus interest, my parents had been ordered to pay damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and lost investment opportunities. My cousins and I had each received significantly more than our original inheritance would have been worth, while my parents faced bankruptcy and potential foreclosure. Most importantly, Luna's educational fund had been restored and expanded through the court-ordered penalties. At age 6, she had a college fund that would ensure she could attend any university she chose without the financial struggles that had defined my own life. My grandfather's dream of securing her future had been realized, despite my family's attempts to steal that security away from her. The personal transformation I had undergone during this ordeal was profound and unexpected. The timid daughter who had always deferred to family authority had evolved into a confident woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept mistreatment from anyone, regardless of blood relations. I had learned that sometimes the family you choose is more loyal and loving than the family you are born into. My cousins Rebecca and Michael had become true allies and friends through this experience. We now spoke regularly, sharing our children's milestones and planning visits that our grandfather would have loved to see. The bond forged through seeking justice together had created the kind of family connection that my parents had destroyed through their greed and deception. Mrs. Chin, my grandfather's former neighbor, had become an unexpected surrogate grandmother to Luna. She attended every school event my parents had missed, celebrated every birthday they had skipped, and provided the kind of unconditional love that my biological family had made conditional on their financial convenience. Luna called her Grandma Chin and had no idea that this wonderful woman was not actually related to us by blood. The community support that emerged after the truth came out had been overwhelming and healing. Neighbors, coworkers, and even strangers who had read about our story reached out with encouragement and assistance. Several local businesses had donated services for Luna's delayed but spectacular 7th birthday party, creating a celebration that far exceeded anything I could have afforded on my own. My father had attempted to reach out several times during his probation period, sending letters that alternated between apologies and attempts to minimize his actions. I had returned every letter unopened, with "Return to sender" written across the envelope in permanent marker. Some bridges, once burned completely, should never be rebuilt. Marcus had made more persistent attempts at reconciliation, claiming he had been unaware of the full scope of their parents' theft and asking for a chance to rebuild our relationship. However, his version of events contradicted evidence I had gathered, and his apologies felt more about relieving his own guilt than acknowledging the harm that had been done to Luna and me. My mother's attempts at contact had been the most pathetic and manipulative. She had sent cards on Luna's birthday and major holidays, always signed "Love, Grandma," as if nothing had changed between us. Each card had been thrown directly into the garbage, unopened and unacknowledged. She had forfeited the right to be called Grandma when she chose luxury vacations over her granddaughter's future. The professional success that followed had been unexpected but welcome. The confidence and strategic thinking skills I had developed during my pursuit of justice had translated into career advancement that elevated both my income and my professional reputation. I had been promoted twice in 6 months, finally earning the kind of salary that provided real security for Luna and myself. More importantly, I had learned to set boundaries and demand respect in all areas of my life. Coworkers who had previously taken advantage of my accommodating nature discovered that I no longer accepted unreasonable demands or disrespectful treatment. Friends who had been draining and one-sided found themselves gently but firmly removed from my social circle. The legal victory had also attracted attention from other families dealing with estate fraud and inheritance theft. Catherine had referred several similar cases to me for consultation, and I had discovered a passion for helping others navigate the complex process of uncovering financial deception and seeking justice against family members who had betrayed their trust. Luna had adapted to our new life with the resilience that children possess when they feel loved and secure. She asked about her grandparents occasionally, but seemed to accept my simple explanation that some people make choices that hurt others and have to face consequences for those choices. Grandma Chen and our chosen family provided all the love and support she needed. The anniversary of my grandfather's death had become a celebration rather than a day of mourning. Luna and I visited his grave with flowers and stories about how his love and planning had secured our future despite the people who had tried to steal it away. I told her about the grandfather who had loved her before she was born and had worked to ensure she would have opportunities he never had. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that my family's betrayal had ultimately been a gift, though certainly not one I would have chosen. It had forced me to become strong, independent, and self-reliant in ways that being supported and loved unconditionally never could have. I had learned that I could face any challenge, overcome any obstacle, and protect my daughter from anyone who tried to harm us. The sweet taste of complete vindication never faded. Every time I deposited the monthly restitution payments my parents were required to make, every time Luna talked excitedly about college plans that were now financially secure, every time I walked through my own home purchased with money that was rightfully mine, I felt a deep satisfaction that came from seeing justice prevail over greed. Looking back now, I can honestly say I would not change anything about how this story unfolded. My family had taught me that blood means nothing when money is involved, but they had also taught me that I am strong enough to fight for what is right and smart enough to win against people who underestimate me. So, let me ask you something that has been on my mind since this whole ordeal began. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted completely were living secret lives funded by money that should have been yours? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining family peace and fighting for justice that might destroy relationships forever? What would you have done in my situation, and do you think the revenge I orchestrated was justified or too extreme? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because family betrayal stories like mine are more common than people realize, and sometimes we all need to know that others have faced similar choices between loyalty and justice. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family drama, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to people who think family loyalty means accepting their abuse and deception. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it is possible to fight back against family members who take advantage of blood relations to avoid consequences for their actions. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting someone who refused to stay silent about inheritance theft and family betrayal. I hope my experience encourages others to investigate suspicious family financial situations and to never accept poverty and struggle while relatives live in luxury funded by money that might rightfully belong to you. Remember that chosen family can be more loyal than blood family, and sometimes the greatest gift toxic relatives can give you is showing you exactly who they really are when money is involved. Until next time, keep fighting for justice and never let anyone convince you that family loyalty means accepting their lies and theft.